And I'm pleased to rise to speak to this motion today because tax reform is desperately needed in this country. Yesterday I addressed the issue of bureaucratic inefficiency, but we also need to change the way in which our taxation system works, because we currently have a system that punishes those people who are productive and rewards those who sit back on their wealth, and it can be lazy wealth and it's not earning an income. We also have a system in this country where for some reason we seem to want to tax domestic earnings much higher than offshore earnings. And that, of course, encourages retained earnings to be sent offshore, only to be replaced by foreign debt. And yet again, there's even a special provision in the Tax Act that allows foreign debt to be exempt, the interest that you pay on this foreign debt to actually be exempt from tax. And I became aware of that section of the Tax Act, and I've mentioned it many times before. Section 128F of the 1936 Act, the public offer test, was the moment I thought, I'm going to have to make a run for politics here, because there is no one else in this country who would actually be aware of what this Act is and why it's there and the impact it has on this country. So I'll start off on that slightly obscure but very important section, because that public offer test is not a public offer test at all. What it says is that if you offer a bond in the primary market to at least 10 participants, you don't have to pay withholding tax. And of course, anyone knows anything about the Treasury bond market knows that not anyone in the public can just walk up and issue a bond in the Treasury bond market. I think it was $500,000 in my time. It might be $1 million today. That's the minimum parcel. You need to issue a bond in the bond market, and the sort of people that pay withholding tax, of course, are foreigners. So I knew straight away from my Treasury experience that this was a section in the Tax Act that allowed foreign banks to avoid having to pay tax on the interest that we pay them offshore. And I thought to myself, I wonder how people who earn interest income in this country would feel knowing that foreign banks don't have to pay tax on the interest that we pay to them, but hard-working Australians, pensioners in particular, retirees who earn interest on their bank account, and many of them do want to earn interest on their bank account. They don't necessarily want to have their money in the stock market as they get older, because they don't want to suddenly wake up one morning and find out the Dow Jones has collapsed and their equities the value of their equities have rapidly diminished. So many older people don't want to take risks and do like to invest in fixed interest. Well, guess what? You've got to pay tax, but foreign banks don't. But I want to actually address many other issues in this, and I know I'm going to run out of time, but it's important that I do address it. And one of the other things that really grinds my gears in this country is the fact that people on low income who earn less than the cost of living have to pay income tax on that cost of living, have to pay income tax on that income. And all that does is actually drive these people further into poverty. Now, my view is if you get out of bed every day and put your nose to the grindstone, and I don't care whether you're earning 40 grand or 100 grand, that first 40 to 50 grand on your income should be tax-free. Because currently, if you, say, earn $50,000, you're paying about $10,000 tax and you're paying about $6,000 in superannuation, and you're just about to start paying HECS. So you're effectively losing $10,000, $16,000. So you're going from I'm earning $50,000 to take-home pay of $34,000. Now, it's highly likely that unless you're still living at home with your parents, and even then you'd probably struggle to live on $34,000, you are going to go back below the poverty line. So I think that we tax low earners at too high a rate in this country, and it needs to be reduced. And ideally it needs to be reduced to zero. And I think that we also need to call out Treasury for the way that they model these tax cuts, because they effectively don't assume secondary impacts. And that discriminates against income tax for low-income earners, because if you're a low-income earner, the money that you will earn, and if you did get a tax cut, say of $1,000, it's highly likely that most of that money will end up back in the Treasury within the next 12 months. So we need to look at why we tax low-income earners at 16. It's now 16 cents in the dollar. It was previously 19 cents in the dollar. And we need to ask ourselves that, those low-income earners are paying 16 cents in the dollar plus 2% Medicare plus 12% super, while you can have money in superannuation, uncapped. You can have millions of dollars in superannuation. You could be earning $150,000 in superannuation, and the most you're paying on your earnings is 15 cents. Now, I fail to see why someone earning less than $45,000 has to pay 18 cents, including Medicare, plus 12% super, while someone who's a multi-millionaire and have millions of dollars in super only pays 15 cents on their earnings, and if they hold, if it's capital gain and they've held it for longer than a year, they only pay 10 cents. So yet again, we have this arbitrage between different trust structures or different corporate structures. So if you've got your money in a superannuation fund, which is effectively a trust, you're paying a lower rate of tax than someone who's actually earning, trying to get ahead and getting out of bed and trying to earn that through an active wage. And many of those low-income earners actually work very, very hard. They'll travel the furthest to work. They're doing the menial jobs like cleaning, cooking, working in aged care. These aren't easy jobs, and someone has to do it. So we really need to look at the way we go about taxing low-income earners. But the other thing we need to look at, there's a big hoo-ha at the moment over the fact that Treasury want to bring in a system whereby if you have more than $3 million in assets in superannuation, you're going to pay 30 cents in the dollar, and if you have less than $3 million in assets, you're going to pay 15 cents in the dollar. Now, it's really strange that superannuation, for some reason, taxes based on your balance and not on your income, because you could have $2.8 million in superannuation and earn a 5% return, so you could earn $140,000, and you could have $3,001 in super and earn 3%, so earn, say, $90,000 and pay a higher rate of tax on $90,000 because that particular year your rate of return on the asset was less than someone else's rate of return on the asset, and pay a higher tax rate than someone that actually earned more than you. And I often think it's been used to mask the significant superannuation tax concessions, which are just shy of $50 billion. And if you look at the tax expenditure statement, that $50 billion goes mainly to the upper 25%, nearly all of it goes to the upper 25%, while we still have the pension that costs $54 billion. And that tax expenditure statement has actually forecast that tax concessions for superannuation that mainly go to the upper 25% is going to very quickly exceed the cost of the pension itself. So this is another issue that we need to have a look at, because it is completely what you call dysfunctional, and there is no symmetry in any of this, whereby we've got a flatter tax rate. Different people, depending on their income, they can have the same income and pay different amounts of tax, and that's completely dysfunctional. What we want is a system where we have a very simple tax system and everybody pays the same rate of tax based on the level of income they earn, regardless of whether or not it's in superannuation or not. It should just be all taxed at a flat rate on the same amount of money. And so I would actually think that we need to seriously look at taxing superannuation based on income levels. And I would suggest somewhere between $20,000 or $30,000. Your first $20,000 to $30,000 in superannuation is tax-free. You can add that on top of your first $40,000 outside of superannuation, and there you go. You've still got a very generous tax-free income if you're retired, but after that you go back to your marginal rates rather than just have a flat 15% in superannuation. Now, the other thing we need to look at in this country is that we have an onshore tax rate of 30 cents, and that's before franking credits that I'll come to in a minute. And depending on the withholding tax treaty that you're dealing with, and depending on where that money's sent, that withholding tax rate on profits transferred offshore can be between 0 and 15 cents in the dollar if it's with one of our recognised trading partners. Now, that is basically encouraging any company to either set up a subsidiary offshore or to transfer their profits offshore. And that is ridiculous. And we saw it a few years ago with the iron ore companies. What they did is, obviously, if they kept their earnings here in Australia, they'd pay 30 cents. So they decided to set up a marketing hub in Singapore, whereby they could pay marketing fees to Singapore, What Singapore knows about marketing iron ore is beyond me. It's not like they've ever had any iron ore. But suddenly the BHP and Rio and Fortescue decided that they needed to set up a marketing hub in Singapore. And of course that was nothing more than a tax dodge, and I'm glad to say that the tax office did get on to those iron ore companies about it and they've shut them down. But this sort of behaviour goes on all the time. We've seen it with Pfizer, for example. Their operating profit ratio is 7%, despite the fact that their worldwide operating profit was 40%. And of their $1.4 billion in sales, about $1 billion of it got transferred to Ireland. Why Ireland? Pfizer Ireland, who I doubt would actually have a manufacturing plant, why that money needed to go to Ireland is beyond me, other than the fact that Ireland has a company tax rate of 12%. So it's very simple logic. If you get a tax deduction here, you save 30 cents in the dollar, you send the money to a low-income tax jurisdiction and you pay 12 cents there. Now, many people will say, well, you can't have withholding tax on profits sent offshore because you'll have double taxation. That's not the way it works. What you actually got to look at is the cumulative rate of taxation. So if there's a withholding tax rate of 10 cents here in Australia on profits sent to Ireland, and Ireland has a company tax rate of 12 cents, the cumulative rate of taxation is 10 plus 12, 22 cents. It's less than 30 cents. So there's an 8-cent arbitrage there for the sake of paying a lawyer to set up a subsidiary, putting an office over there and effectively transferring profits offshore. And that sort of behaviour goes on quite a lot. And while I know the tax office does a very good job and tries very hard to crack down on it, they literally cannot keep up with the amount of international transactions going on. And that is why the very easy way to do all this and deal with this in a heartbeat is to effectively increase the rate of withholding tax on all profits sent offshore. There's more tax treaties than you could put a stick at, unfortunately, and I haven't been able to go through all of them, even though actually, after I finished my Masters of Tax Law, I actually went back and did another subject at the University of Sydney just to come up to speed with it. But this sort of stuff, you just can't keep up with it. Put a higher withholding tax rate offshore and lower the company tax here so that we encourage people and companies to retain their earnings here in Australia rather than shift the profits offshore. And you will find that, like anyone that understands the balance sheet, if you increase your retained earnings, you'll have a higher capital account and you'll need less debt. So it's actually one of these things that will help encourage reduce foreign debt in this country. But the other thing we need to look at is the amount of churning and the real company tax rate here in Australia, because imputation tax credits have had 2 iterations in this country. First was when Paul Keating introduced imputation tax credits, and the second time was when Peter Costello decided that he would refund tax credits. And of course what that did was create a massive churn in the economy, and I've worked on both sides of the ledger here. First of all, as a company tax accountant, where you'll pay company tax down to the ATO in Canberra, and then 6 months later the shareholders will lodge their tax return, and then the ATO will refund the company tax paid to Canberra back to the shareholder. And Australia is, I think, the only country, or one or 2 or 3 countries in the world, that refunds franking credits. It's a very inefficient system of churning money through Canberra. It requires companies to keep franking accounts and streaming accounts, and they've got to watch how they frank their dividends and everything like that. And then it creates a whole heap of work at the other side for the public accountants who have to go through and work out all the franking credits and all the rules around that. You're much better off just having one, and I think the states do this, I'm pretty sure the states do this, where you just have a rebate of 10 cents, and that way then you don't actually have to actually repay the money once it's been sent to Canberra. But we need to have a look at that, because our actually net company tax rate is now below 15 cents as a result of the balance in superannuation funds going from when Costello introduced the refund of franking credits of about $500 million, it's now $3.5 trillion, and it's forecast to hit $9 trillion by 2050, 2060. So eventually we're just churning money through these superannuation funds only to repay it later on. Let's get rid of all of these, yet again, this arbitrage between these different legal structures in which taxable income is declared. But long story short, if we want to increase productivity in this country, we need to look at lowering taxes on active income. We need to look at lowering taxes on income earned here in Australia, and we need to look at actually retaining our earnings and encouraging productivity, which our current Tax Act does not do.
Authorised G. Rennick People First Chermside.